Welcome everyone to the call Enhancing the Social and Economic Inclusion of Refugees through Local Development Strategies. My name is Camila Coz and I am a policy analyst at the Migration Policy Institute. First, a housekeeping note. If you have any technical problem, please email events@migrationpolicy.org or call the number indicated on the slide. We will have a Q&A at the end of the call. There will not be a voice Q&A, but please type any question into the Q&A chat box on the right side of your screen or send to the host or email question to events@migrationpolicy.org. You can also tweet your question at migrationpolicy or hashtag MPI discuss. We now welcome three guests who have been very engaged in the topic we're discussing today. Benjamin Burkert, who is Senior Social Development Specialist at the World Bank, Kodek Mokari, who is the Commissioner of Kenya Refugee Affairs Secretariat, and Mamadou Diane Balde, who is Deputy Director at the Division of Resilience and Solution at UNHCR. Since 2016, and even more since 2018, and the adoption of the Global Compact on Refugees, humanitarian and development actors have increased their efforts to join forces in low and middle income countries hosting refugees. Many of these interventions have focused on integrating refugees, including them in national development strategies, and also promoting their effective access to public services like health and education. This webinar zooms in on what these efforts look like at local level. With our three panelists, we will discuss how development actors can work with local authorities and UNHCR to enhance the social and economic inclusion of refugees. For many decades, subnational authorities have been at the forefront of hosting refugees, and while their capacity can be narrow, they still have a direct experience in welcoming this newcomer and mitigating tension between host and refugee communities. And in recent years, development actors have sought to build on their experience, their expertise. In Kenya, for instance, the authorities of Turkana province partner with UNHCR and development actors to design a local development strategies that integrate the refugees living in the Kakuma refugee camp. In a country like Burundi, the World Bank and the government have agreed to include refugees in local governance bodies in order to identify common issues, common projects, common answers. This experience suggests that many changes for refugees will start at local level, while general principles agreed upon in international conference are being implemented. This discussion today between the World Bank, UNHCR, and Kenya Refugee Affairs Secretariat will explore three main questions. First, how can development and humanitarian actors work with local institutions to promote refugee inclusion? What form should this cooperation take on? Is it about including refugees in local development plan, inviting them to local consultation, and how to prepare local authorities to include refugees in this discussion, and sometimes to overcome some prejudice they might have about the refugee population. Second, how has the involvement of refugees in local institutions materialized, and how to ensure this participation leads to concrete changes for refugees? Who should speak in the name of refugee? How can they select representatives? And beyond that, how to ensure that these representatives are in a position to negotiate with local authorities. And a final question, in fragile environment, how to build on these efforts to better include refugees to enhance the engagement of other groups that have traditionally been marginalized, internally displaced persons, ethnic minorities, or returnees. But first, let me introduce Benjamin Burkert from the World Bank. Benjamin has been based in various countries in Africa and is currently working on forced displacement in Cameroon. Ben, could you tell us a bit more about the World Bank response to forced displacement, and specifically in the context of working with local authorities, how these efforts are drawing on years of experience of the bank working on decentralization, particularly in light of the project you're now managing in Cameroon?
Okay, thank you very much, Camille, and welcome everyone. First of all, thank you for the opportunity, and it's great to see. I see that already that many people are connecting. So I would like to discuss with you a little bit about my experience as a World Bank practitioner, and to tell you what we're trying to do, especially in Cameroon. So in terms of what is available within the World Bank for displacement issues, first of all, I think it's important to to remember that the World Bank, back in February, just approved a new fragile and conflict and violence strategy for the coming few years. So to show really the engagement of the World Bank in this. And there is also, you know, as part of the different IDA cycles, since the IDA 18, I mean, and we are now in the IDA 19 since July 1st, there is a dedicated sub-window for refugees and host communities situation. In fact, since July 1st, there is now 2.2 billion available throughout the world to various numbers of countries that have a forced displacement situation. In terms of what we're trying to do in Cameroon, has been to really see how we can somehow embed the issues from forced displacement situation into local development projects. So instead of focusing on preparing a dedicated new project, it was decided, because Cameroon has already a number of projects with the World Bank, to see how we can strengthen them and maybe customize them to respond to the needs of the refugee situation. Therefore, we have prepared, in fact, additional financing directly using this sub-window dedicated for refugee situation to 4 projects: for education, for safety net, for health, and for local development. The idea here is to see how we can provide a better holistic approach to the needs on the ground. And by doing so, to really ensure that the needs of the refugees, but also of the host communities, are better addressed. If I take an example, by working together, if I look, for example, at the school, I mean, we will now be able, with the education project, to work towards having better teachers, having books. But with the local development project, to also, for example, building extra classrooms to make sure that the classrooms are not crowded. With the health, also that the students are in better shape. I mean, maybe focusing, for example, on nutrition, and have a better attendance rate at the school. And finally, with the safety net, to ensure that we can address the needs of the most vulnerable. So all this focusing, once again, on the refugees and the host communities, without targeting specifically one or the others, but more to see how we can address the issues instead of really focusing on a different type of, on a specific type of beneficiaries. I need to also add that all these projects have been prepared and are being implemented in very close relationship with UNHCR. And we're very lucky to have the commissioner with us today. So the idea is to see really how, with what has been currently being implemented by UNHCR, how we can build on that, how we can harmonize our approach and provide better services to the people in need. I mean, it's important also to realize that in Cameroon, I mean, you have hundreds of thousands of refugees. I mean, coming from the CR crisis, or coming from the crisis linked to Boko Haram. And so you have different type of situations, being either where you have the refugees directly integrated into the villages, or where you have camps. So those two situations also brings, of course, different needs, and the way it needs to be proposed has to be shaped a little bit differently. For the people that are already in villages, it's very important to understand their needs, and that's what we do so with the local development plan, right? I mean, when we go, we do the focus group, and we ask the questions to the communities, what are their needs? Then we do the same with the refugee people to ensure that they are not left out, but they are fully integrated of what should be done at the commune level. And interestingly enough, the needs are quite similar, in fact. I mean, the refugees or the host communities face many of the similar issues. In camps, I mean, it's a bit different. I mean, where somehow much more support is provided by a number of actors already on the ground. Nevertheless, I mean, we're trying to see how we can also open up the camp more to the population, the local population, the host communities. For example, in terms of hospital or health clinic or education. Again, to see how this inclusion can really be embedded at the local level. There is now in terms of, and I'm not sure exactly how much time I have left, but a little bit on the challenges that we are facing. I think it's extremely important that we all understand and we all know each other and we understand how we work together. I mean, the relationship with UNHCR has been, I have to say, quite fantastic, but also because we took on both parties a lot of time to understand how the World Bank works, how UNHCR works, and ready to see where we can have the linkages. So for me, one of the main challenges is really to understand that somehow we need to change. We need to probably improve or nuance or adapt to the way we work, taking into consideration the needs of the other actors and the way they work. By doing so, we can make sure that when, for example, we need to address a new refugee emergency situation and that we need to build a new camp, for example, and I fully agree that, I mean, we need to act very quickly. I'm sure that we address the needs of the people, that we save lives. But in the meantime, we can already start thinking a bit more on the development side and see, in fact, where we are exactly and how we can maybe address the needs of the local population. And here I'm talking maybe the provision of water or looking towards a health facility or this type of thing. So I think this is a great momentum where the World Bank coming in, all the humanitarian development actors also understanding the needs of the ground to see how we can all coordinate and really not harmonize, but see the advantage that each partner can have and how we can address more the refugee situation, I would say, than really only the specific needs of the refugees, but more to have a better, I would say, approach that would benefit more people than the only a certain type of beneficiary. And voila, that's it for now, Camille. Back to you.
Thank you for the intervention, Benjamin. It was very good to hear from the World Bank efforts to engage with subnational authorities in this community development project approach and the project in Cameroon. And I now turn to Commissioner Macrois from Kenya Refugee Affairs Secretariat to discuss the situation in the Turkana province. What cooperation between humanitarian development and local actor has been established, and what are some of the key takeaways from this effort?
Thank you, Camille, for inviting me. Loud enough.
Commissioner, I don't think we're able to hear you. Could you speak up a little bit more?
Just hold on.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, fine. Thank you for inviting me to be part of these discussions, and welcome everyone on board. And I'm going to talk about what we have, which is actually a pilot project in one of our camps, Kakuma, which is what we call the Kids Step. And so I request that probably you allow me to proceed right away. We have 921,000 refugees in Kenya. In Kakuma and Kalobei, where this project is based, we have 196,000. Kalobey has 38,000. Kakuma has 107,000. So basically, the Kalobey Integrated Socio-Economic Development Project, which actually is acronym as TZD, is one project that we are proud of as Kenyan, and I think it's something we can tell to the world. It's an area-based planning approach based in a small area of the Turkana County, which is the western part of the country bordering Uganda and in the South Sudan. It is this approach is part of a county integrated development plan, which is the planning tool used to map out development projects in the county, which is actually the CIDP. The CIDP is also part of the National Development Plan and National Development Strategy. Of course, the setup is in Turkana County, but specifically in the Turkana West sub-county. Of course, Kakuma is the major town and the headquarters for the sub-county, and of course, the home to the refugee camps. The Kalobey Integrated Refugee Settlement is also nearby, and this is where the target is. And of course, the leadership of the project is by the county government of Turkana in collaboration with the UNHCR. Of course, the national government as a collaborator with the Turkana County government is part of the implementation. The project started sometime in 2018, but prior to that, there was a planning phase, and it has 3 phases, one running up to 2022 from 2018, the second phase from 2023 to 2027, and the third phase will be running from 2020 to 2030. So as we speak now, we are in the first phase of implementation, in the middle of the first phase. And the first phase was estimated to cost $500 million USD, and this financing will have been sourced from government, both the county and the national government, the humanitarian actors, the development partners, and the private sector. And of course, the World Bank and the UNHCR represent the development partners and humanitarian agencies in this, plus many, many others. This project had 4 objectives. One of the objectives is to create a conducive environment for private sector investment in Turkana West. The other is to enhance innovative aid delivery and increase financial inclusion for refugees and host communities. There was also the objective of increasing access to higher education for refugees and host community children, promote and support market-driven skills for refugees and host communities. And finally, I want now to show you the map of Kenya, if you are watching the screen, so that you can have a feel of where this project is based. So on towards where we have a blue color is Turkana West, if you are seeing. And so within that area is where the project is based, but of course it is in the Kalobey area. The other thing is here on the Turkana County government, or the Turkana County map. At the time of establishment of the program, there were 320,000 host communities, the Turkana community living in Turkana West. And at that time, there was 186,000 refugees, totaling to 506,000 people in the Turkana West. And so this is just a section, a small section of the county. As you can see, the county is a massive one. And so the target population was 506, but you can see close to almost half now of that population is a refugee population. This project was premised on some principles, and one of them is that it is a government initiative led. It placed communities at the center of the planning. It is an area-based approach, as I said earlier. It was supposed to do sustainability of investment in the target area, and it had to do some kind of market development for goods and services that are produced in that area. So far, we have made very many achievements in the areas that were targeted for purposes of implementation of the project. The first area was health, and in health, the Turkana government developed a bill, a health bill, and in this bill, refugees did participate in the making of the bill. In Kenya, it is a constitutional matter for people, the public, to participate in developmental policies or bills or projects. And for this one, the Turkana and the refugee community were involved in the development of the bill. Then 65% of the refugee and host women are now able to deliver in underskilled health professionals. So the project has really assisted the community. More qualified health workers have been employed through the project. Child mortality has been reduced by 30% among refugees. The 8 health facilities in the refugee community, that in Kalobei and Kakuma refugee camps, are being accredited to NHIF. NHIF, for those who are not Kenyan, is the National Health Insurance Fund. And this is a good thing, because once they are accredited, then anybody accessing the health facility will use the insurance provided by NHIF to get treatment. On education, 233 classrooms have been constructed or rehabilitated. This could be new or old classrooms which have been rehabilitated to date. 20% increase in access to higher education has been realized. There is support to improve policy and environment provided to the Ministry of Education. Actually, this through KISDEP, the Ministry of Education has received a lot of support, not necessarily financial, but in terms of capacity building to develop policies that can support refugee education. And 80% of the refugee children pass exams. They perform very well in the national examinations. Actually, this is compared to 76%, which is the national average. So when you look at the gains made in education for refugees, the refugees have gained a lot more than probably the locals. On water and sanitation, refugees also again here participated in the water bill of 2018. Sorry for the error that is on the screen. So the refugee bill, the water bill of the Turkana County government was done in 2018 and actually accented in 2019. There was participation of the refugees in making of that bill. So it's now an act of the Legislative Assembly of Turkana. There is enhanced interest from the private sector to invest in water and water supply in the area. 158 functional water boreholes have been drilled in the Turkana West, and 4,106 toilets have been constructed within the vicinity of the refugee camps and the neighboring communities. On protection, we have 168 children in foster care by June last year. There is an initiated training curriculum for refugee teachers. There is inclusion of refugees into the CIDP. The CIDP too is a county integrated development plan, of which the KISDEP is a part of. And then we have where now issues of we have issues where we have taken over the registration of refugees as government, and I think let me proceed to the next. On private sector and entrepreneurship, 20% increase, and all those things that have come with that, $20 million US have been transferred through cash-based transfers, and refugees build their own houses. So they have cash in their pockets, and very many other things. 7,500 refugees have access to credit. So I think so far up to that end, I'll stop there. Maybe when the time comes, we will respond to any queries that can be raised. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this comprehensive overview of KISAP. And this take of, how this has performed so far. And now we'd like to conclude with Mamadou Diane-Balde to give us a bit of UNHCR perspective on how cooperation with subnational authorities has sometimes a little more direct improvement for refugee was, well, it's also come with limitation.
Thank you, Camille. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Thank you so much, Camille, and thanks to MPI for organizing this event, and greetings to all. I think the fact that I'm coming last is the pressure on myself. So I would like really to share 5 points to support what Commissioner Makori and Benjamin have said, but also emphasizing a few others. The first one is really to say that for UNHCR, we have been for very long looking for opportunities to have refugees fulfill their own human capital potential. It means that refugees, as you know well, are like you and myself, and they have capacities, and to be able to use these capacities, we need to have a very solid protection environment. And to really support this, we have a very solid legal foundations through the 1951 Refugee Convention, which has rights relating to access to education, access to work, and in the case of Cameroon and Kenya, and the possibility to also have through the 1969 OAU Convention access to these rights. That's so really the first point is to say that we have long been looking for opportunities for refugees to fulfill their own human capital. We have solid legal foundation, but we have also learned from experience. Through 70 years of experience, we have seen, for example, that the very short measures of receiving and hosting refugees and believing that they will soon return and that they should be isolated out of the societies that generously host them, these approaches do not work. So already in the 60s, UNHCR has worked with several governments and in several countries across the world into having zonal development approaches so that refugees can work, that refugees can contribute, and that they can work and be socially linked with the communities that host them. So that was really the first one. The second point I wanted to share is that very importantly, and Camille referred to this, in 2016, we really had a breakthrough through the New York Declaration and its comprehensive refugee response framework, and since December 2018 with the Global Compact on Refugees. What is that breakthrough? The breakthrough is that we are realizing, or we have realized, that when refugees arrive, it is to the benefit of everyone, refugees themselves, generous host countries, development actors, humanitarian actors, societies hosting them, that it is beneficial to all of us to have refugees included into some of the systems where they are hosted. We have also learned by then, after several years, that refugees are themselves part of the solution. So how can we enable them to contribute to the societies that so generously host them? So that's in 2016 we had that breakthrough, and that was really reflected into the 4 objectives of both the CRRF and the GCR, which are that the international community will work with host countries that are very often in the global south. 85% of the refugees, as many of you know, live in the global south, so that so that the international community will support and ease the pressure on host countries, and that the international community and national government will help refugees live much more dignified life through access to self-reliance, and that we will be working much better in relation to solutions. These were the first two broad points that I wanted to share. Now, let me go to the next three. The first one of those is the importance of close partnership with national authorities. We all heard Commissioner Makori about the work that has been done in Kenya with the national level authorities, but also the subnational level authorities with the entities in Turkana County. We know that if we do not have such type of work, and that we do not only work at national level, but also at subnational level, the potential of the refugees as well as the host populations and helping them access better to water, education, other basic services will not really be fulfilled. So that's really, I think, a very important aspect of what we are trying to do, and we are learning more and more about making sure that national levels, subnational levels, and that authorities are engaged. And yes, authorities are the ones that are elected, but also the societies that represent these authorities. So this importance, I think, is highlighted, and we heard very closely from what Commissioner Makori just said about KISIDEP and a few other programs they have in Kenya, how these are important. And we have few other examples beyond in Cameroon and few Uganda, Ethiopia in this part of the world. The second point that I wanted to add as part of the last three really related to the greater need for partnership with development actors. Benjamin said it, UNHCR has long tried to work with the World Bank, and the World Bank has been involved for decades on supporting refugees. In the 1990s, we went through the Brookings process, but only after, I think in 2016, were we able to have, through the World Bank, through donors, host countries, to have really a sub-window only dedicated to refugees as well as to host populations. That sub-window is making a difference, and that's one of the big examples. There are few others, but I think humanitarian actors, development actors, led and are supported by national government are really the ones, these are the ingredients that will help have refugees better supported, as well as the host populations with which they live in. My final point here before giving back the floor is to speak about the refugees themselves. I said it earlier, that refugees are part of the solutions. We just heard the commissioner stating that refugees in Turkana County have been participating into decision-making bodies. We have several of these good examples in Uganda, for example, where you have the CRRF steering committee based in Kampala, consulting with refugees working much more closely with local populations, and having some of the most important issues relating to access to school, for example, being addressed by national authorities, but also by UNHCR, by development actors. So this, we know that is really critical, and we are learning. There are no perfect pathways or blueprints on how best refugees can participate, but we know that they can participate. There are very good examples. There are really good practices that UNHCR really will spend our time speaking about. And I think if the refugees themselves are able to contribute, because they know better than all of us what is best for them, we can better support them. So these were really the 5 points I wanted to share, again in support of what was shared earlier. Back to you, Camille.
Thank you very much for this precious insight into this question, and yeah, this very structured 5 points. I think we've now managed to gather a comprehensive perspective of the efforts that are being deployed to work with subnational but also national authorities on this question. And so I'll open the floor for Q&A. As mentioned, you can type your question in the chat box, but maybe I'll start with 3 questions for Benjamin, and there's also one that might be relevant for Mamadou as well. So you mentioned, Benjamin, the linkages between UNHCR and the World Bank. Could you tell us a bit more on how this cooperation works concretely at country level, field level, and then at HQ? Another question was on the fact you mentioned that focus groups were conducted among host communities and also with refugees to identify the different needs of the community. You said that there were a lot of common needs, but when there are different perspectives on what is the most, what should be the pressing priorities, have you, managed these differences? And then the last question was on the impact of COVID on this work and whether working with local authority had proved more helpful than just working at national level.
Okay, thank you. So on the partnership with UNHCR and the World Bank, it's in fact what we already, setting up. It's a partnership between UNHCR and the government, and directly also the project on the ground. So how it works, at my level is that I talk to UNHCR, 2 times a week, right? To really make sure we're on the same page, or to really know what they're doing and that they know what we are doing. Then they are in a relationship also with the different projects being implemented. Then they also have meetings with this project, and then they also are part at the local level directly with those projects. And again, here when I say projects, let's not forget that with the World Bank, it's money that is lended to the government. So in fact, it's just the government. So what we're trying to really do is to make sure to connect the dots, between UNHCR, the World Bank, but also when I say UNHCR, it's also them represented the humanitarian actors, right? So that's how we really do it at the national and the local level. We also, for example, use UNHCR to define where we're going to do our activities related to the refugee sub-window. They give us all the figures that are then directly used by the government. So again, here it brings the ownership. Other examples is that the module that they have to train, for example, teachers on the refugee rights. Once again, this will be used for the education project. The activities that they do on the health, psychosocial support, etc., also to be used by the health project. So lots of linkages at national, but also at the local level. Again, I think of a big meeting that we had at the ministry level lately, through WebEx. And so the World Bank was there, UNHCR was there as well. So the idea is really to have a very collaborative approach. On the focus groups, well, the needs are different, and that they are expressed, and that they are endorsed by the community, then they make it into the PCD, the local development plan, that are then the roadmap of development for the community. But here, what I say the need is really often related to schools, related to health centers, roads, etc. If the question is more related on the, for example, access to land or integration of refugees in the labor market, that's something that is not entirely, I'd say, worked at the local level, but more at the national. Because also with the refugee sub-window, what we have is that we have the government that is engaging itself on the number of actions towards integration of refugees. So here, that would be something that could also benefit the refugees. And last but not least, on the COVID response. I mean, it's a little bit too early to say, but what we're trying to do, at least at the local level, with the local development plan, is to see again how we can try to address the needs of the communities, not targeting especially refugees or hosts, but more as a whole. And last but not least, again, we are continuously exchanging with UNHCR to see what they're doing and how we can harmonize our approach. I hope I answered at least a little bit. Back to you, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all these answers. I don't know, Mamadou, if you want to add something on the linkages between UNHCR and the World Bank.
Yeah, no, thank you, Camille. Yeah, just to complement a bit, Benjamin. Indeed, our work at country level is essential, and how we work with the national authorities in charge of refugees as well as other line ministries are indeed extremely essential. First of all, during assessment times of projects that we work on with the World Bank, but also once projects have been assessed, designed, and then approved on their implementation, UNHCR's added value is about protection, is about knowing the conditions of refugees. It's about working with national authorities very often for decades, so having the data, and the World Bank comes in with all these additional socioeconomic type of data, as well as a broader fight against poverty. So these really at country level are extremely important. And as Benjamin said, before my current position, I was in Ethiopia, where we had, for example, fantastic relationship and leaning on the comparative advantages of it. At the more global level, my division at UNHCR work closely with the FCV colleagues at the World Bank in DC. We work closely also with some of the global practices, like the ones on jobs and social protection, education, and few others. And trainings are indeed extremely important. We just had, for example, for our colleagues in the Western Central Africa, a certain number of webinars just to help easing that understanding. I think that really the other point I wanted to add was on the COVID-19. Globally, COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting refugees all over the world. Because most of the refugees, as you know, where they can work, usually rely on daily wages, and without without social protection, or very limited social protection. So yes, the involvement of development actors, or in the case, for example, of Kenya and Cameroon, having refugees included in let's say national program on accessing education and few others, are extremely important. So just to say that refugees are disproportionately affected by the overall message of inclusion of refugees into host societies, into national programs, also resonated during the time of COVID, and when we are trying to address COVID and its negative impact on the societies that we have now. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this comprehensive answer. And I now have a few questions for Commissioner Makori. You mentioned that refugees are allowed to elect their own leaders, and a few people were wondering whether these elected leaders were elected within the camp, or whether they were represented in government bodies at sub-county level or at county level. A second question was on the effect of the South Sudan crisis on the project, and what had been, some of the measures to mitigate this effect. And there was a third question on the efforts, how the efforts conducted in Turkana province have been perceived at national level in Kenya, and what could be the implication for this discussion at national level on the refugee situation, and if you want to say a few words about the current discussion on the refugee law.
I think on the elected refugee leaders, what we do is to allow the refugees to participate in a democratic process where they elect their own leaders. If they are in camp, they do the election in camps, and there are various categories of positions that are available. Of course, they have representation up to community level, meaning if they are Congolese or they are Burundians or they are Ethiopians, they have some kind of inclusion in that leadership. They have a chair, they have all other positions taken by various other communities within that setting. Even those in the urban have that opportunity, we give them that opportunity. The reason for this is that if we have to get to the refugees, we need to know who their leader is and how to get them. And so these are the leaders who will mobilize for us refugees if they are participating in some event, or the leaders themselves can come and represent these refugees. Of course, they are not, the leadership is not anchored in any government body. It's just a separate issue regarding refugees themselves. But we at Refugee Affairs and the county governments and anybody else wanting to deal with refugees recognize that leadership that is there. So the second question on the impact of the need crisis on the development in Turkana. Of course, you know, majority of the refugees in Turkana, in Kakuma and Kalobei are from South Sudan. One of the positive effects that they have had is that they have created a large market for goods produced within Turkana, or a market for goods that are imported into Turkana. The other is that as Turkana County prepares to make Kakuma a municipality, these people are giving Kakuma a mileage over to become a municipality because population is also a consideration. However, dependency on the South Sudanese who are in Turkana for purposes of creating such a municipality might be counterproductive when finally they leave. So we are afraid that probably that might affect the market and the internal operations of the Kakuma town and the environs. On the last question, I didn't get it clearly. I don't know whether you can repeat it for me.
So the question we got was on how the efforts conducted in Turkana have been perceived at national level, but also, you know, the implication for the situation of refugee in the entire country, and if you could say a few words about the discussion on the law, the recent discussions that have taken place.
Okay, let me start with the last one on the law. I think on the law we are progressing well. The bill has gone to second reading in Parliament just last week. The Parliament moved out for a recess. When they reconvene in maybe 3 weeks' time, we believe that the discussions on the law will continue until the law is formed. In Kenya, we do first, second, and third reading. So we have one more reading where they scrutinize the bill and then agree on whether to pass it or to decline. But from the discussion that took place in Parliament last week, there was every indication that the majority of the speakers were in support of the bill. So we expect that all will be well. On how the national government takes the developments in Turkana, especially on the TCDF, I think initially there was not a very positive note from the national government because these things went very fast. Of course, the Turkana government and the UNHCR moved the process quite fast, but recently seeing what has taken place, what is happening, because most of the achievements that have been achieved are really supposed to be achieved by the national government, providing these people with education, healthcare, all these things. And yet, the Turkana County government has been able to mobilize partners to achieve this on behalf of the national government, which is a positive. And I think for now, the thinking in national government is that probably this could be the way to go in terms of managing refugees, having them to participate in the local economy, and probably empowering them for purposes of making sure that when finally the time comes for their return home, they are returning home when empowered, and that then the return will be sustainable. Let me stop there, and I hope I've answered all your questions. If there is something that I have not addressed, just remind me.
Thank you very much. I just have another question for you, but that is also directed to Mamadou on the fact, like, how do you feel that all these initiatives help address conflict between refugees and local host population? And if you have an example you could provide.
Well, these initiatives may not necessarily address all the conflict between the locals and the refugee community, because we keep seeing this. But we also have conflicts between refugees themselves. So, of course, much of the conflicts have been addressed by these initiatives, because when they are made to participate in policy making, in law making, in program design, they come together as a community living in the same county and being served by the same government in the same county. However, there are other things that generate conflict. Ownership of property, like land, is not clearly defined in Turkana. So most of the land in Turkana is communal owned. So even where refugees have been given land to operate on, sometimes a conflict can come because the leaders might decide this is where the camp is, but the local population may not entirely agree, and so they always see it as a conflict area. But of course, cultural issues also come into play. We have had cases of serious conflicts in the camp, especially pitting the LGBT community and the host community. And actually, the LGBT community against their own colleagues, refugees within the camp, because of the way certain people perceive certain cultures. So I can't really say that this has entirely eliminated conflict, but however, I think most of the conflicts have been addressed by this.
Thank you very much, and I think it's an interesting point also on the fact that there are also conflict among refugees to be managed. Mamadou, I don't know if you want to add to this, and Anna, another question for you on the capacity building efforts that are needed for local authorities in some countries where provincial authorities or commune or cities might not have the expertise on refugee issue, and what type of effort had been implemented in the past few years to help bridge that gap.
Thank you. I think yes. Let me just maybe start with the issue around conflict, and to complement what Commissioner Makori has said. Indeed, there are conflict and the potential of conflict between small groups, large groups, and if you look at some settlements, some refugee camps, some of them have the magnitude of cities or provinces. So yes, so you have them among refugees themselves, as well as between refugees and hosts. And while between refugees themselves, you have the structures, you have the communal way of addressing them, of preventing them, the national level structure, including judges, etc. With host populations, you also need to bring in additional support, because the reality is that very often it is the host populations that receive the refugees long before international actors come in, or even sometimes national authorities come in. They are received, and land is being shared, limited resources are being shared, and then the refugees stay because conflict in the countries of origin have not been solved. So, and then the situation becomes protracted. Hence, again, for a long period of time, we were not really able to have in development actors. Now, with the New York Declaration, the Global Compact on Refugees, as was exemplified in few places, bringing in development actors as early as possible really mitigates the possibility of conflict or dispute due to lack of resources and for a long period of time. And if it is done in a concerted and integrated, inclusive manner, including refugees, host populations, I think we will have lesser need for addressing conflict because we would have prevented them much better by easing the pressure, again, which is the first objective of the GCR. That's first point. And then the second one, capacity building of local authorities, I think is critical. We should be doing much more than we have been doing until now. In several countries, we are aware of good examples. In Rwanda, in Kenya, the commissioner just referred to that, in Uganda, in Ethiopia, in several countries where we have capacity building efforts, sometimes support to local authorities so that they can really address some of the issues that the populations that come, and some of them come tenfold to the initial populations that they had. And you cannot expect that a local authority that was dealing with 2,000, 3,000 persons, when you have 20,000 refugees coming in, to be able to expand that quickly. So how can we need to do more in relation to capacity building as well as capacity strengthening for local authorities. Again, we have good examples, but I have to say it is a responsibility for all of us. If I may, Camille, I just wanted to underline quickly another point, which is the importance of data. You asked the commissioner how national authorities looked at initiatives like the one in Kalobey. In addition to really all the work and the results that we start seeing now, the importance of data, as well as explaining, if you allow refugees the possibility of working and contributing, what can they bring to the communities? That, I think, is extremely important. And, in the case of Kalobey, we were able to partner with the IFC, the private sector arm of the World Bank group, to be able to come with some detailed information, credible and reliable information. So data and studies that help this really make a difference in relation to policy making. And finally, refugees are elected in several contexts. There are standard operating procedures. You have election charters depending on the country. And again, they are not perfect like in several countries, but I do believe that this is a way that we should be exploring a bit more. And when allowed, they can contribute the way us can contribute. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, on the election, that's true that there are elections in a number of contexts, and the World Bank has sometimes built on this mechanism to inform its project. I just have, and I'm sorry because we're short on time, but I just have a last question for Benjamin about IDEA 19 and whether we should expect more projects building on this approach under IDEA 19, and maybe what are the things that might be different under this new funding window.
Okay, thank you. Yes, there is much more to come because there is 2.2 billion that has been set aside for the coming 3 years. So what type of project? It would depend on the context and the results that are shown. But very short answer to just say much more to come, and we look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, and apologies for not addressing all the questions. We have to close for today. Thank you again for our 3 panelists for participating in the discussion, and the slides and the audio from today's webinar will be available on our website.